Voorgestelde wysigings aan die wet op billike indiensneming sal, indien dit aanvaar word, neerkom op nog strenger regstellende aksie en sektorale raskwotas. Is dit 'n goeie plan? Dumisani Mpafa, beleidshoof van die Black Business Council, asook Piet le Roux, die uitvoerende hoof van Sakeliga, sit hier oor kan my. Dumisani, welcome. I want to start with you. Article 53 of the Employment Equity Act has never been promulgated since the early mid-90s. Now, suddenly, Minister Mildred Oliphant says this is the tool that government needs to at last force companies to transform. What exactly will this section do?
Thank you for having us, and thanks for the opportunity. Indeed, it has never been promulgated, and a part of the work that we've been doing at the BBC is to lobby government to say, please promulgate this legislation. And the reason is because this act is 20 years old, and it was never meant to last that long. It's a transitional piece of legislation supposed to address a specific problem, and after that we become a normal society where there is no employment equity legislation. But 20 years later, we all know that in terms of the statistics that comes from the Employment Equity Commission, we're nowhere in terms of meeting the EAP targets. So this certificate of compliance, this section 53, will come with a certificate of compliance, which basically means that if a company meets certain targets, but the first thing before the compliance is that you need to have targets. So in terms of this proposed amendments, there are going to be targets, sector targets. Of course, they're going to be negotiated with different sectors. There will be targets, and if companies are meeting those targets, they will get a certificate of compliance to say they are complying with the employment equity legislation, so that they can do business with government.
But before we get into the debate about the merits of this law, how will targets be determined per sector of the economy?
By the discretion of the Minister Mildred Oliphant or her successor. I'm afraid, Valdemar, that these two amendments, these two changes, the promulgation of Article 53 and the amendment to that's Article 15A, means that the Minister will now be able to force, in the same manner as BE legislation, companies to comply with targets that previously they could determine themselves. Now she's going to prescribe them by sector or by any breakdown of the sector, however she wishes to determine it. This is very, very strict and very, very meaningful.
Okay, so we have a sense of now what is the intention here. Let's look at the extent to which these targets in the economy have been achieved. We'll see now on the screen the representativity of top management, professional level, and to lower skilled levels of employment in the economy, showing that, and I'll read from numbers showing what's been happening in these different sectors. Since 2001, the white representation in top management has gone from 87% to 67%. There we have the 67 top right on the screen. Senior management, 81% to 56%. Professionally qualified, 56 to 36. And Black African, Dumisani, I'm coming to you in a moment, has gone from 6 to 14, 9 to 22 on senior management, and 33 to 42 professionally qualified. Dumisani, one could argue that this represents rapid progress from a fairly low base, if you look at the percentage rise in black representation.
Well, you could argue that, but also I just need to indicate that at some point, I think around about 2010, the African representation, especially on top, was sitting at 15%, and it has regressed between 2010 and with the recent statistics, 2017 figures. But also, when you look at those figures, you must contrast them with the AAP target. What's the economic active population of Africans, of coloured Indians and white South Africans? The AP target for white South African, I think, is about 9.6. And if you're looking at their representation there, they're way above their economic active population. And for Africans, I think it's about 78 or something like that. But in terms of their representation, even though there is progress, we must acknowledge progress where there is, coming from a slow base, as you say. But in terms of representation, we're still coming way, way too short.
Piet, talk to the point, please, of speed of transformation. What does those numbers tell you?
Look, Valdemar, I think I can talk to the speed of transformation, but we must investigate the premise here as well. We're speaking about representation and the economically active population, as if that is a wholly prescription to this country. And to jump from this is a racial breakdown of the economically active population to this is what every workplace at every job level should look like is a large jump. Because what determines the appropriateness of an employee is who lives in a specific area. It is dependent on the level of skills and level of education in a specific area, and that's not reflective of the economically active population. And so what we're seeing here is wedging into and socially engineering the workforce with disregard to very important material realities, and I'm very concerned at that. Now, let me get to those statistics. So what we're seeing there is a change, as we should expect, because a normal society, before there was legislation that prevented people from working in different places, we're seeing that normalizing. What those statistics don't show is what's happening in the public sector. There, by 2014 already, it was largely representative of the economically active population. This is private sector data. What wasn't shown on the screen now, which is very important, is we're talking now as if there's a problem because white people are overrepresented. Currently, on those statistics in the same report those statistics came from, the Indian population is on many of those levels 5 times more, like in top management, you'll find 5 times more Indians than their share in the economically active population. So what we're going to see next is that this targeting and this quotas that is being now applied to white people is going to be applied to other demographics, and we're going to see total social engineering. It's very concerning.
Dumisani, please address the point that Piet made about the fact that the economically active population is not the pool from which appointments are made, because, as you know, appointments are made from people who are qualified for the job. Why look at economically active population?
Look, I mean, we could be looking at demographic, and the target will even be higher. So the economically active population.
But what is the best criteria?
I'm coming to that. The economically active population basically looks in terms of the population that is employed and those that are unemployed but actively looking for jobs. So those are actively, working population, if you like. So you have to look at the working population to actually set your targets. But then, in terms of these proposed amendments, the minister will have discussion, with the sectors and say, what sort of targets outside of the economically active population that we can agree to, which targets as a particular sector, because you don't want to say, for instance, in mining, you must have the same targets as in banking, because the skill set that you might find in banking and in mining could be different. So you have a discussion with the sector, you set targets, and every industry will participate in the setting up of those targets. And once those targets are set, then everybody will then aspire to achieve those targets.
Before I get back to Piet, do you not think at the BBC that the example of the public sector is a warning to the private sector of not pursuing transformation at a too rapid pace?
In what way?
The public sector has, many flaws, is barely functioning. Is there no correlation between transformation that is too rapid and...
There's absolutely no correlation. I'll tell you, the affirmative action is very clear. It's a appointment of suitable qualified candidates. So you must appoint suitable qualified candidates to achieve equity in the workplace. It doesn't say you must appoint people that are not qualified.
Right.
So if somebody, in actual fact, as BBC, we are just as frustrated when we see people that are not qualified being given responsibility that they cannot handle, because it actually frustrates the implementation of affirmative action. So that's something else. There's nothing to do with employment equity. But employment equity is very clear. You appoint suitable qualified candidates. And some of the candidates that get employed, some of them are very qualified, but they work sometimes in a very toxic political environment. That has nothing to do with employment equity.
There's disagreement here about the basic premise of this legislation. So let's just go to the law for the moment, because that is supposed to be more objective. But in your reading of this law and the Human Rights Commission's remarks recently about quotas, do you expect this law to be challenged in the Constitutional Court, and do you expect it to pass constitutional muster?
I think it will be very important to challenge this. I suspect that organizations like Solidarity and many others will be looking at this. We certainly are looking at this. And Valdemar, I think it's important to point out that this isn't an isolated development. We're compiling research now that we've found various memoranda of understanding over the past 18 months, changes to the Competition Act, changes to the Companies Act, all of them weaving basically an unholy alliance with a view to enforcing this national demographic requirements onto the economy. And I want to make it clear, Valdemar. I think we will see, and as we should see, a natural transformation of the economy, a spread of ownership, a naturalization and normalization of employment statistics. But what we are now seeing is governments and ministers enforcing their view and their statistics onto the economy, and that's not the kind of transformation that makes any sense. It's the kind that harms, and it's the kind that is not in the benefit of consumers, which is what economics is all about.
Because, Dumisani, members of the BBC surely do not all want more government intervention in the private sector, do they?
No, certainly. But you must remember, where the private sector fails to address that which they're supposed to. Because must remember, in terms of employment equity, for the longest time, it has been, the targets and all that were determined by the same employers. They will sit and develop their own employment equity plans. They will set their own 5-year targets and implement those targets. But what has happened in the last 20 years, we have not moved as much as we had, as we should. And then what happened, because we are not, as private sector, doing what we're supposed to do, then we get government intervention. So we invite government intervention by actually not implementing. We can't have, as a normal society, employment equity being a feature in our society for 50 years.
But do you think
it must come in for a short period of time, fix it, get out, so that we can it can be a normal society where there is no need to have an employment.
Is a normal society, just 10 seconds, is a normal society one in which the private sector perfectly represents the entire racial makeup of society?
The normal society will be a society where everybody is given dignity, there's a right to equality, and everybody, regardless of what color you are, you got a right and you have an opportunity, to participate like anybody else in the economy.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all we have time for, Dumisani. Thank you, Piet. Bly ingeskakel, die program gaan net hierna voort.